Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for coming out on this snowy night. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome to the 13th Annual International Education and Diversity Forum. The forum tonight is focused on adversity and equity, the opportunities for healing through social and emotional learning. So I'd like to begin our evening with a welcome from the interim president of Whitworth University, Dr. Scott McQuilkin.
Thank you. Well, I've been invited to provide a brief welcome, and the operative words are brief and welcome and not long and address. So first, a special word of thanks to Mrs. Wilson Whipp and her Mount Spokane High School students. The artwork that you've seen throughout above on the PowerPoint was all theirs, and they are obviously very, very talented students. So at Whitworth, the mission of our institution is to provide our diverse student body an education of mind and heart, equipping our students to honor God, follow Christ, and serve humanity. And for this 13th Annual International Education Diversity Forum, I'll invoke some of the words of the Apostle Paul because I think they speak directly to the university's commitments to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Paul spoke about the body of Christ, that there are many parts of the body. They're all different. They are all needed for the body to function well. Paul went out of his way to describe the multinational and multi-ethnic gatherings that represented the church universal, all gatherings. And so at our best, Whitworth lives into Paul's words, celebrating the breadth of God's creation and the value of every person created in God's image. Your hosts tonight, the Whitworth School of Education, the people of the Whitworth School of Education, they are so good, as you well know. You can walk into any school in the region, and you can throw a dart in any direction, and you will hit a Whitworth-trained and educated teacher or counselor. I'm married to one. I have a daughter who is one, and I know firsthand the immeasurable difference that teachers and counselors are making, only a sliver of which you will ever know the impact that you have made. I know that about the students with whom you have contact. So thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for participating. We know that fruit will be born from this time through these sessions. So I'll turn it back over to Dr. Mickey Abercrombie Donahue for the formal introduction of Professor Laurent.
Thank you again. We have an engaging and transformative event planned for you this evening. If you review the agenda given to you on the bookmark as you entered the event, you will see that our time begins this evening with a wonderful cultural performance from the Moses Family Drumming Group, known as Native Generations. Then we will move into our keynote address from Professor Laurent, after which you will have the opportunity to engage with Professor Laurent in a question and answer period. We'll close our general session with closing remarks and thanks to our School of Education Diversity Planning Committee. Then we'll have an intermission where we encourage you to stay and proceed to our breakout sessions. We have 2 breakout sessions for you to choose from to provide you with an excellent opportunity to reflect and apply the information from the keynote address to your current work and relationships in our community. So I would like to introduce and welcome the Moses family, members of the Spokane Tribal Nation, who make up the family drumming group known as Native Generations. Father Roger Moses is the lead singer, who's also the lead singer of the very first family group with his dad and brothers and sister, known as the Spokane Falls Singers. Roger's children, who make up Native Generations, are also second-generation singers and dancers. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Father Roger Moses and the family drumming group, Native Generations.
So just really quick, I'd like to extend a thanks to each and every one of you, especially being out this evening and the weather that we have. And again, we're thankful for this opportunity to be able to come out and share with you a song that will bless this gathering as well as each one of you as you travel home this evening. And these songs are learned, picked up, shared. We travel around from different celebrations throughout Washington, Idaho, Montana, sometimes in Oregon. And in those travels, we've met, other lead singers. We've had the opportunity to sing with other groups, and we learn one another's songs. And we're always asked that we do those songs respectively and sing them the way that they're taught. So tonight we want to bless this gathering, and again, thank each one of you for your diligence to be out here this evening to take part in something that is very important. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, again, we're thankful for this opportunity to be able to come out and share this song with you. One of the things that we are also from a culture that is gift giving. So much like sharing these songs, we share words of encouragement, words of thanks. And oftentimes we'll give gifts. But so I got asking one time, when I go to a big, large gathering such as this, how do I give a gift to everybody in the room? Well, the song was one of them. And the other thing is having counseled with several tribal elders from different tribes throughout the Pacific Northwest, they said, always use your words. So tonight, I want to say in the Salish language of the Spokane tribe, Chinyoyo Sklaumit, Stemos Pu'us, is what I've said is Chinyoyo Sklaumit. Each and every one of you are a strong person. Stemos Pu'us, always remember what's in your hearts. Lemlems, thank you.
Thank you so much for your words of wisdom and for that incredible blessing. Thank you. Let's give them another round of applause, please. Thank you. I'd like to take the privilege of introducing you to our keynote speaker this evening, Professor Inga N. Laurent. Professor Laurent is a professor of law at Gonzaga University. Professor Laurent's main area of focus centers on analyzing and reimagining our current legal system. She returned to the faculty of Gonzaga University full-time in the fall of 2017 after spending 9 months researching restorative justice in Kingston, Jamaica as a Fulbright scholar. In the classroom, Inga's goal is to prepare students for the challenges and opportunities that will be present as they enter the profession, equipping them with the tools for honest and critical assessment of our systems and of ourselves. Aside from her work with externships, Professor Laurent is engaged in advocating for criminal justice and legal education reform, as she believes we need innovative and equitable models to better address the shifting needs present in our evolving societies. Prior to working in academia, Inga worked as staff attorney with the Southeastern Ohio Legal Services under a grant from the Federal Violence Against Women's Act. While at Souls, she provided holistic civil legal services to victims of domestic violence. Inga received her Juris Doctorate from Cleveland Marshall College of Law and her Bachelor of Arts from Westminster College. She has been a member of the Gonzaga community since 2010. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Professor Inga Laurent.
Good evening, everybody. Oh, good evening, everybody. Oh, so much better. It's a cold one, so I appreciate everyone. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you being here to hear about a topic that is very, very dear to my heart. So I hope to invite you into that space with me tonight and to take you along on a little bit of a journey. And so let's get started. I'd like to start by asking you a question. There's no need to answer this question for anyone but yourself. okay? But I would like you to think about a scenario. I'd like you to think about a time when someone has hurt you. Now, I have some questions to ask about that. Was this a recent event? When did this occur? Was it something that happened a long time ago that you've had time to sort of work through and to potentially heal for yourself? Is it something that's fresh and new and something that's raw, something that hurts even now, just thinking about it? Does it set off that kind of a emotion in you, or is it something that you've had a little bit of time to potentially grow from, potentially transcend, to sort of heal or get past, as people say? Who committed this wrongdoing against you? Who hurt you? Was it somebody who was close to you, right? What was the relationship of the person who hurt you? Was it a stranger? Was it somebody who you had a relationship of trust with and that trust became broken? And now I want to ask you, what happened because of that? What were the outcomes with regards to the impact of the hurt? Do you still carry it with you? Have you changed the way that you interact with other people because of it? What are the impacts of the hurt on you? How does it show up in your everyday life? And now I want to ask you, if you could sit down with the person who hurt you, if you felt safe enough to sit down with that person, if you felt you were at a place where you were healed enough to have the conversation with the person, right? If all of those things, if you were ready to ask for more information from that person, what would you want to know? What kinds of questions would you want to ask the person who hurt you? What kinds of information would you be seeking from them? What would you want to understand about why and how the situation unfolded? And what would you want to tell that person? What would you want to tell them about how their actions impacted you? What would you want to tell them about how your life has shifted or changed because of how they impacted you? So I start here because it's the best approximation that I have that I can give you in a 40-minute presentation, which isn't a huge time. I usually teach a semester-long class on restorative justice, but it's a starting point to try and quickly explain to you a little bit about some of the reasons and some of the underlying reasons why people are interested in exploring this topic of restorative justice and what it might be like. So that's why we start there. So I'm going to do my best now to give you a really brief, about 5-minute overview of how we got here. And when I say how we got here, I mean, how did our criminal legal system evolve, right? How did we get there? And I'm going to take you through just sort of a brief history of human history, and try and get you to the understanding, to give you a little bit of information about the theoretical sort of underpinnings and the roots of restorative justice. Where does it come from? Because I need you to understand the values underlying restorative justice before you try to tackle how the process works. Because the problem is that people usually jump to process. How do we do it? Give us the toolkit, right? And we're going to go out there and implement it. But if you don't understand the why behind it, then you don't know where you can make the cuts. You don't know like where a safeguard needs to be in place or where you can release, right, and let the process be flexible. So I think it's imperative that anybody who's interested in this topic of restorative justice starts at the beginning and starts to understand the why before you start trying to tackle the how. So how did we get here? Well, long story, as short as possible. So I'm gonna tell you something which might sound a little bit strange, but listen up and maybe by the end you'll sort of vibe with me. You'll understand where I was coming from. So restorative justice has been the dominant model of criminal justice throughout most of human history for perhaps all the world's people. That is quite a claim. But if you think about human history, it is long, okay? I know that we kind of think in terms of recency, and it's hard to imagine that long spectrum of human history, but we just saw the circle that these folks sat in and have been, right, and said that they have been on this land for time immemorial. Human history is very, very long. So when you think about that, you can start to understand the roots of restorative justice better. We lived in small, interconnected, tribal communities. That is how we survived for most of human history, okay? So you needed your hunter-gatherers. You needed people to raise the children. You needed one another in a very real way, right? Life was precarious. It was dangerous, right? There were very real sort of physical dangers. And so we truly, when we say it takes a village, that's where it comes from. That's what it means to be in community with people who you are interconnected to and interdependent on. You need one another. So our societies looked like this and like this, right? Our societies were tight and circular. So when someone in this circle committed a wrongdoing, your response could not be to remove that person from the circle. We did not have a retributive lens where we tried to remove or exclude someone because their dependence is interrelated with ours. So instead of retribution, the idea was restoration. The idea was to bring this person who transgressed against the community back into alignment with our values and norms. And we did that through a dialogic process where we said to that person, let me tell you what your actions, how they hurt me. Let me tell you how your actions impacted me. And let me ask you why you did what you did. How can we bring you back into the norms of our community and our society? What need wasn't met that you felt you had to go against the society, that you had to take something out? What misunderstanding did we have with one another, right? So the goal was to keep us intact together as a unit, not isolation, not removal. Then, fast forward to the feudal aristocracy, lords and ladies, kings and queens. Now, they had a different idea, a different understanding of justice and how they would meet it. So they looked around out there at their kingdoms and they saw lots of people solving problems together in their small groups, right? They saw lots of people sort of taking care of issues on their own. And they thought, well, maybe we should assist in the process, right? Maybe we should be a neutral third-party arbiter so people don't go out there and so people don't get in skirmishes on the street, right? Maybe we should come in and we should be the neutral third party who solves the problem, or who at least listens and then decides who gets the restitution, who gets the payment. And we'll take a small fee for that. Just a little one. We'll take a little fee. I mean, it takes a lot of money to like run these things, to be facilitators of justice. So what happens, and I do want to say that the goals were laudable, right? The goals of the kings and queens and the lords and ladies, etc., was very laudable. It was, we need a streamlined system of justice. We need predictability. We need folks to come to one place when they have a problem, right? So the goals were valid. But when you prioritize one set of goals, completely eradicating another set of goals, then we have a problem. Because what essentially happened from this kind of a system, moving into this kind of a system, was that you take away people's agency, people's responsibility, people's rights to solve their own problems. And it's hard work. It is hard work to stay in community with people. And if the government steps in as the actor, when someone commits a crime, who's the crime against? What do we say? What's a criminal case called? Does anyone know? State, right? When a wrongdoing gets committed in this kind of a system, the person wronged is the state. It's not the actual victim. And so what happens is the victim keeps getting moved off to the side, and the state becomes the primary actor, the primary person who is transgressed against. And that means that the wrongdoer and the victim, the person who's been wronged, never have an opportunity to find out what happened or to get to the bottom of it, right? So it creates a vacuum. It creates an absence of information. It creates an absence of understanding. And it's very easy as an offender to distance yourself from the wrongdoing that was committed, because you never have to look the person in the eyes and in the face who you harmed. You never have to hear about the harm, right? You never have to hear about how your actions impacted somebody's life. You can just, what they call, sort of wall off and desensitize and disassociate, right, from the actual crime. And we find that that's often what happens, right, for folks who go to jail, go to prison. They disassociate from the crime. They disassociate from the harm that was done. They don't have true accountability to the victim. And our system, and this system, exacerbates it. As being the state actor, who is the primary point of contact with regards to who the wrong was committed against, then you also have other sort of procedural safeguards that wind up on top of it. What's your Fifth Amendment right? You have the right to remain. Do you see what a counter incentive that is? If you have the right to remain silent, and in fact you're a fool if you speak, right? What information? Take me back to the beginning when I asked you those questions. What information does that person potentially hold that the victim may want, right? Who holds that information? One person. One person. That's it. It's the only person who can give any answers. It's the only person who has any answers. Now, it's not to say that this is the panacea. This situation doesn't work for everyone, right? Restorative justice is a viable option, but only with certain safeguards, certain procedural, lots of stuff we don't have a ton of time to get into because I really want to talk about sort of the values underlying it and the theory underlying it. But I do want you to see, right? I want you to see what happens when we go from this and we go from our responsibility to be in community with one another into a system where, frankly, what started out as a neutral third-party arbiter has become, oh, we need the fee for that arbitration, that neutral arbitration. Oh, now we're going to add an investigative wing. Now we add a prosecutorial wing. Now we add an adjudicatory wing. Now we add a probation wing. And in Spokane, 70% of our budget goes to the criminal justice system. So we are on the back end of all of these issues rather than on the front end of them. And we pay for it. We pay for this, very literally. So I just want you and folks, when we're hearing about this, to sort of think about those shifts, right? There's a question that Howard Zare, who's called the grandfather of restorative justice, poses to all of us. And he says, how should societies respond to a wrongdoing? I think this question is maybe one of the most important questions that the justice system should answer. First of all, because it suggests that there is an alternative. It suggests that there is choice. Because what we have now is not working. And the illusion that all we have, and this is all we have, and sort of like continually banging our heads against what we know doesn't work, is very problematic. And so I try to ask this question a lot. Like, how could we respond? What possibility exists for something different, for an alternative? It's not saying that that's an easy road. And that's, I think, where people make the mistake. Or that the system is inherently, like, that we have an answer. That we have something, like, in our back pocket that we can, like, yeah, this is it. This is the alternative. It's going to solve all the problems. No. But it's a question that we need to ask. Unless we want to just keep replicating what we have. Right? Unless we want to keep replicating unwellness. Right? And when we talk about people going to prisons and people being incarcerated, all of the studies show us. Think about it. You put people into a situation to essentially, right, we say, what do we say? An eye for an eye, right? Just desserts is what you're getting. So we put people into situations where we are trying to hurt them for what they have done. You will pay for what you have done. You will experience pain and degradation for what you have done. How does that teach someone who doesn't have the skills and abilities and who made bad choices on the front end anything new? How does it teach people to live and show them an example of how to do something better? It doesn't. It doesn't. And yet we keep thinking that, oh, this is going to deter the activity. Well, folks, it doesn't. The studies all show us that prison doesn't serve as a deterrent, right? It doesn't serve as a deterrent. And so what you're doing, as we say, right, you are exacting pain on people to show them and to teach them that they should not have exacted pain on someone else. We end up in this cycle, a very unhealthy cycle, if this is all we have to offer, right? So we have to ask the question, well, if this isn't working, what possibility exists, right? And I'm not saying, again, we have critical studies of restorative justice. It's no panacea. It's no, like, magic bullets, right? But it is a possibility. It is an alternative. And it's an alternative that can work in conjunction with the criminal justice system in situations that are a good fit for restorative justice, okay? I do want to talk a little bit about the underlying theories for restorative justice. So the idea is based on two theories, primarily a relational theory and a need theory. The idea of a relational theory is that we in society have relationship to one another, right? And when a wrongdoing is committed, those ties are frayed. And we would like to be able to offer an opportunity through restorative dialogue to try and repair those. You may not be able to. You may not be able to transcend what happened. You may never be able to pay someone back for what you have taken from them, but perhaps we could try. And perhaps, maybe, even if we can't get somewhere like forgiveness, we could get somewhere like understanding. We could have a fuller picture of what happened and why it happened and what this person experienced in their life that led them to make the decisions that they make, right? So that's the relational theory. And the need theory is, in essence, that crime is created from and comes out of unmet needs, right? People commit crimes because they are unhealthy, unwhole, because something is going on in here that hasn't been addressed. And we need to figure out as a society how to address those needs rather than exacerbate them. So that's the idea of relational and need theories. So we say for restorative justice and retributive justice, we put them next to each other and say that it's a question of values. So a retributive lens sees crime as a violation of the state. It's defined by law-breaking and guilt. Justice determines blame and administers consequences that are directed by systemic procedural rules and values. The values are, again, laudable: consistency, predictability, punishments in the hope of deterrence, and incapacitation or isolation. Get out of our community, right? If we don't see you, we don't have to deal with you, right? And the question is, what should be done with the offender? Conversely, it's not even conversely. It's not like a full sort of, it's just like a spectrum of ideas. So there's an alternatively, maybe I should say it that way. Restorative lens looks at crime as a violation between people and relationships. It creates obligations to make things right. Justice involves not only the offender and the state, but it involves the victim and it involves the community that was impacted just as much as the victim might be impacted, right? Community often gets left completely out of the equation. But if something violent happens in your neighborhood, does it unsettle your sense of safety? Crime is a violation on multiple avenues, on multiple fronts. And the current sort of traditional system does nothing to bring in the voices of community and the ways that they are impacted by crime. And it's about a search for a forward-focused solution, right? As well as an understanding and an unpacking of what came before it. It promotes repair, reconciliation, and reassurance, right? Ideally, if you enter into this circle, the point is so that we can learn how to stop this from ever happening again. What needs were not met? How do we meet them? How do you, going forward, never make choices like this and hurt someone else the way you hurt me? Right? Those are the questions that we can ask in a restorative dialogue. So again, the values are relational and need theory based, and the question is different. The question is, what can be done to make things right? Maybe. Some of you have probably heard this. When I talk about need theory, this is at the heart of it, right? The child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. If you think about what we have out there today, when we think about criminal activity, this should hopefully really get in your mind, right? The idea that need is underlying and lack and a place of unwholeness, unwellness, that should be hopefully, I think I'm talking to the right group, that understanding is what is underlying, right, wrongdoing behavior, right? And so we need to talk about needs when we're doing this work. And there are a lot of them. I think this is one of my favorite quotes because I just feel like it's so inherently and deeply true that justice begins with needs. If you can understand those needs, then you have a pathway to potentially make an unjust situation just, right? But you got to understand what needs are absent. And a wrongdoing creates all kinds of needs for every different player. When we're talking about needs, I'm going to categorize them very simply in 3 categories. We're talking about victim needs, offender needs, and community needs. So a lot of people ask, they're just like, why would the victim even want to do this? Why would the victim even want to enter into a dialogue or meet with somebody who caused them harm? I ask you to go back to those questions I asked you at the beginning. There is a need for us, after something has gone wrong, to ask why. Why did this happen to me? Right? Will it happen again? To understand the why. There's a need for information. There's a high need that victims have to understand what happened and to understand the whole story to what happened. Right? Did I contribute to the wrong in some way? Was it completely not my fault and it was completely random? Right? There's a lot of information that's out there that's needed by the victim. Not only that, the victim needs an opportunity to tell their story in whole, multiple times, to tell about the impacts of what somebody did to harm them, and especially to tell that person directly to their face. What your actions did impact me every day. Can you imagine what that must feel like to be on the receiving end of? Right? That is an intense process that people are going to enter into. And we have to have the safeguards around it to make sure, right, that people are ready and able to enter into those conversations, that you have a truly willing victim, somebody who's not being forced into this process or who thinks that they should do it, but who is at a stage and a place in their life where they do want answers more than anything else. There's a video on here, which I won't have time to show you, but it's called Meeting a Killer. It's a documentary about a young girl and her grandmother whose mother has been murdered. And they go to meet the person who killed their mother. That process took over 2 years to be able to create. And they had to be the right circumstances. And there had to be a facilitator who actually was a victim of a violent crime, who walked people through the process to figure out if people were really ready to enter into this process. She had multiple meetings with the family. She had multiple meetings with the offender, right? And then she ultimately made the decision that they were ready to meet. And I hope that you're inspired after this to go maybe watch it. It's on YouTube. It's incredible to watch what happens because they had so many questions they didn't have answers to. There's a scene that every time I watch it makes me cry. This scene unfolds where she says, the young daughter is basically asking, what were the last words? Remember, he's the only person who has them. He's the only person that has that information. And he breaks down and he cries and he says, I'll remember it for the rest of my life. She said, I forgive you and I know God will too. That's the mother who he killed. And we don't say it for him. We say it for the daughter and the grandmother who burst out into tears and say, the grandmother looks at her daughter and says, that was your mother. That was your mother. That's the kind of heart that your mother had. That gave that child who didn't know her mother a peace that could not be gotten in any other way. And I know, like, people are just like, people get really nervous about the idea of trusting people to make their own decisions about whether or not they're ready to enter into a restorative process. In fact, in that video, the brother is like, I want nothing to do with it. I'm not going anywhere near it. I don't think you guys should do it. And in fact, it was an interesting point because in that scenario, the brother has been racking himself for an insanely long time because he thought that the reason that she was in trouble was because he didn't do something on her car. He thought that's why she was stopped. And they find out in this conversation that she had pulled over to help them. It was nothing wrong with her car. She was being a good Samaritan and going to help them. And so the brother who wanted nothing to do with the process still got answers because somebody was willing to go through the process. But when I say victims have needs, I'm not exaggerating. And when we put our own ideas about what other people need on top of them, instead of giving them the autonomy to make their own decisions, we do a disservice to people. People know what they need to heal, and we need to give them options and possibilities. That does not mean anyone has to take them, but they should have the options that they need. Now, also, you can't just have a willing victim, you must have a willing offender. And when I say a willing offender, I mean something very specific. I mean that this process doesn't work unless you have someone who is ready to ask for reconciliation. Unless you have someone who has come to a point where they are ready to try and make amends. Because otherwise what you're doing is putting a victim with somebody who's in a position to harm them again. So you cannot do that. Restorative justice is a process that works, but it works when you have a willing victim and a willing offender, someone who is ready to take the next stage and the next step in their lives. With that scenario that I just described, that man is in jail for the rest of his life. He actually had nothing to gain in terms of systematic, right? To gain from meeting with that mother and the daughter. What he had to gain was an opportunity to come back to himself. That is what the process can do for an offender. The process allows a productive way forward to take accountability for a harm that you caused, but in a way that acknowledges your humanity as well. In a way that is respectful of who you are as a human, though you made a mistake, and potentially a really big one, right? So for an offender, they have all kinds of needs, and how many people know it? As educators, you all know it. These needs go deep. Who hurts people? Who ends up incarcerated? It is people who have been hurt and who have had their needs not met since very young, right? Often that's who our offenders are people who were hurt, people who were traumatized, people who have ACEs, right? People who did not learn adaptive, positive skills to be in the world and learned maladaptive skills of being in the world. So when we put them through a traditional criminal justice system and they're only looked at as an offender, then that's the identity they take on. That's who they become. When you give them another opportunity to be potentially in a restorative position, there's a chance, there's a window that opens that says you have value and you can make something different. You can make a different choice, and we're going to support you in that choice. We're not going to give you an impossible task. We're going to talk about how you could make restitution and how you can do that in a way that's meaningful. We're going to join together to have that conversation to then decide if we can enter into a restorative contract where I commit to you to repair the harm that I have done. And we talk about how that's possible. For some people, they don't want anything except the assurance or the promise that this will never happen to anybody else. And so oftentimes restorative contracts can be, what can you do with your life so that you are fulfilled, so that you never hurt someone again? So do you see the opportunities there for wholeness for a lot of people on many different levels? Because often what happens when people go through a retributive process of justice, they think that the minute that person gets sentenced or the minute that person is on death row and is put to death, that everything is going to be wonderful, that I am going to release all of this anger. And what happens is often the opposite. People go into very deep depressions after sentencing, after death row happens, for example. Those are extreme examples. But it's because you were told that this was the societal outcome that you should desire. And you never walked through your own process to figure out what you actually needed as a victim. And oftentimes what you need is to grieve. Oftentimes what you need is to understand what happened. Oftentimes what you need has to do with who you are as an individual, not what society tells you you should want. And if you don't have the opportunity to walk through that process for yourself and to have people around you and alongside you who give you the space and the ability to do that, which our current justice system has no capacity for, then we are doing a really big disservice to victims. I'd say that restorative justice does a much better job being victim-centric than our current system. It sure does a much better job being offender-centric than our current system. And what about the last category, community? This is very interesting. Community gets completely left out of the picture in today's society when a wrongdoing occurs. You ever see a community member be invited into court to talk about how they've been traumatized by the experience? No, right? They're completely moved off to the side, not even invited into the conversation. The community needs information just as much as a victim needs information. What if that problem that happened was between two people that knew each other? That's a very different scenario than a problem than somebody getting assaulted, for example, by a stranger. You need to know as a community how to respond to violence, but how can you do that if you have absolutely no information? Did the police come by and tell you, oh, no need to worry, this was a one-time isolated? Do you ever get any information about what happened, why it happened, what you can do about it, how you can support the victim, right? No. And not only that, but what about our responsibility as community members? How many times have you heard, oh, we knew that was gonna happen? Oh, if you knew, why didn't you do something about it? Now, I don't blame the community, I blame the system that we've developed. Because the system that we've developed says, mind your own business, stay out of it, don't be a nosy bystander, don't get involved, this is not your problem. And that is inherently the problem, right? We as community need to be community. When something happens to that victim, when something happens with that offender, how do we come alongside and support everyone so that we can all have a different outcome, right? So that the victim can be fully supported and heard multiple times about what this did to them and how we can support them in a whole, full way by respecting their autonomy. And for the offender, how can we support you so that this never happens again? What did we miss? We weren't involved maybe the way that we should have been when we saw you sort of going down the wrong path. We want to make amends as community. We want to provide a different solution. So the restorative process, the ideal restorative process, brings all of those people together to have the conversation, to create an opportunity together to have something potentially different. I think I'm getting close to my time, so I need to stop. I can't talk much about process or safeguards. Those are all things that are very important. I needed to get you to the heart of what restorative justice is, what its foundations are, so that you understand the why behind it. And now, love to talk about the how, because I think that's a really important question. There's a lot of scholarship on it. There's plenty of opportunities, if this sparked your interest a little, to continue that conversation. Like I said, I teach an entire semester on restorative justice. But I want to leave you with this little clip, because I think it does a really nice job of sort of summarizing the idea and the ethos of restorative justice.
It's been the privilege of my life for 30 years to have been taught everything of value by gang members. And in the last few years, they've taught me how to text, and so I'm really grateful to them, because I find it sure beats the heck out of actually talking to people. And I'm pretty dexterous at it, LOL and OMG and BTW. And the homies have taught me a new one, OHN, which apparently stands for, oh, hell no. And I've been using that one quite a bit lately. My alma mater, Gonzaga University, called me and said they were going to have a big talk on a Tuesday night with 1,000 people. And so I said, sure. And they said, can you bring 2 homies with you? And I always pick homies who have never flown before, just for the thrill of seeing gang members panicked in the sky. I've never picked anybody more terrified of flying than this guy, Mario. He was just absolutely petrified. In fact, he was hyperventilating. And we hadn't even boarded the plane yet. And then our flight crew arrives, and I see 2 flight attendants, females, and they both have very large cups of Starbucks coffee, and they're schlepping up the front steps. And Mario goes, when are we going to board the plane? I said, as soon as they sober up the pilots. I should tell you that Mario, in our 30-year history at Homeboy, is the most tattooed individual who's ever worked there. His arms are all sleeved out, neck blackened with the name of his gang, head shaved, covered in tattoos, forehead, cheeks, chin, eyelids that say the end, so that when he's lying in his coffin, there's no doubt. And so I'd never been in public with him, and we're walking and people are like this, and mothers are clutching their kids more closely. I'm thinking, wow, isn't that interesting? Because if you were to go to Homeboy on Monday and ask anybody there who's the kindest, most gentle soul who works there, they won't say me, they'll say Mario. He sells baked goods at the counter at our cafe. He's proof that only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness has any chance of changing the world. So the nighttime talk comes, and it's 1,000 people, and I invite them up to share their stories in front of all these people for 5 minutes each. They were terrified, but they did a good job. And honest to God, if their stories had been flames, you'd have to keep your distance, otherwise you'd get scorched. I invite them up for Q&A, and I said, yes, ma'am. And a woman stands and she says, yeah, I got a question. It's for Mario. First question out the gate. And Mario steps up to the microphone. He's a tall drink of water, skinny, and clutching the microphone, and he's terrified. Yes. And she says, well, you say you're a father and you have a son and a daughter who are about to enter their teenage years. What advice do you give them? What wisdom do you impart to them? And Mario clutches his microphone, and he's just terrified, and he's trembling, and he's getting a hernia trying to come up with whatever the hell he's going to say when finally he blurts out, and he stops, and he retreats back to his microphone clutching, terrified retreat. But he wants to get this whole sentence out. I just don't want my kids to turn out to be like me. And there's silence. until the woman who asked the question stands, and now it's her turn to cry, and she says, why wouldn't you want your kids to turn out to be like you? You are loving, you are kind, you are gentle, you are wise. I hope your kids turn out to be like you. And 1,000 total perfect strangers stand, and they will not stop clapping. And all Mario can do is hold his face in his hand, so overwhelmed with emotion that this room full of people, strangers, had returned him to himself, and they were returned to themselves. And I think you go from here to stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop. And you stand with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. And you stand with those whose dignity has been denied, and you stand with those whose burdens are more than they can bear, and you stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless. Make those voices heard.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure. Happy that you heard about restorative justice.
Now we're going to have time for a question and answer period. So the mics are going to go out into the audience, and so you can go ahead and go towards the mics and ask your questions.
Once we can come to you.
Thank you so much for speaking tonight. I feel like you were speaking straight to my heart.
Beautiful, thank you.
I just need 2 seconds to get a hold of myself. I need to return to myself. Anyway, you mentioned that all of the things that you have told me really resonated, especially in the last few weeks. I'm a student teacher. And you mentioned that as a society, us here in the West, in the United States, we are told to mind your own business. And my question is that, I'm not sure if this is really a question. You know, I come from a collective culture, and it's the exact opposite of
Where are you from?
from the Philippines. And so there's sort of a fine line between minding your own business and actually taking care of other people. You know, sometimes I feel like the otherness I feel sometimes, you know, when I'm here. I'm sorry, I'm crying.
It's okay.
It's been a very isolating journey
I'm sorry.
as an immigrant. Mind your own business, but I want to have friends, you know.
Yeah.
Reach out, and then the people don't reach back to me. So my question is, it's not really a question.
You don't need to have one.
Maybe it's time for us in the West to learn from other cultures so we can take care of people better.
Yeah.
And all of the things that you have said reminded me of a South African proverb, Desmond Tutu, you know, the well-regarded Desmond Tutu, Ubuntu, which is to embrace those that have committed a crime or that have committed an egregious error in the community instead of ostracizing them. And that's why restorative justice is something that is very close to my heart. And you mentioned meeting a killer. It also reminded me of a documentary I saw when I was in the Philippines she's an actress in the Philippines, and a man burgled her mother's house, and this man killed her mother. But then she decided after like a few years to meet with the man that killed her mother, and then she forgave him, and they had a heart-to-heart talk. And I was just really moved by that story. And, you know, I don't know, everything that you said tonight just really resonated with everything that I've seen and experienced in my life, so thank you. I'm sorry for crying.
Don't apologize for feeling your feelings, please. And thank you for sharing with us, because I think it's really important that we can learn a lot about the ways that we are lacking societally. If we have somebody's perspective that is saying, I feel isolated in this experience. So I thank you for sharing that with us. I believe our goal, what I would like to work my whole life towards is asking people what would make them well. What would make you well? And helping people find it for themselves. Because if we feel grounded and well, we don't have needs and we don't operate from a deficit that makes us want to do something like hurt someone else to get what they have, right? Or to hurt them because there's something unmet inside of us. I think we have to ask societally, how do we make ourselves well? Because it starts here. We cannot make anyone else well. We can only work to make ourselves well and then impact the people around us and help them in ways that they need and that they ask to be helped. So I appreciate you very much for sharing. Thank you.
This might be a question whose answer is beyond the scope of this conversation, but as a teacher, I'm so in awe and so amazed by this entire process, especially because constantly whenever I'm implementing any kind of classroom discipline or anything like that, especially the kind that's based on any form of punitive justice or consistency, predictability, you said this, so you have to do this. There's always this feeling of, I'm just doing this because I'm supposed to, but it doesn't feel completely right. And just having this explanation of like, this is how humanity has always been, and this is about us kind of collectively coming back to ourselves. First of all, so beautiful, thank you for that. I'm wondering if you have seen classroom communities, classroom cultures build up this kind of system in a successful way, and if so, what does that look like? As a specialist, I teach music. As a specialist, I find that it's challenging to build up a consistent classroom culture when I work with so many different groups of kids. But I'm just wondering, like, what that has looked like when you've seen it.
So good news for this room of teachers. Restorative justice has arrived on your doorstep. In fact, teachers are the next frontier. You are taking restorative justice and implementing it, and in fact, there's a ton, you probably picked it up already, there's a ton, if you had a Venn diagram of restorative values and cell competencies, you would find a ton of overlap, right? And so there's a lot of articles that are being written between how we as cell practitioners can integrate more restorative processes. If anyone's involved in the Spokane Public School District, like Pastor Sean here, who you can go hear from later today, they are using restorative measures in the classroom, restorative practices. We call them tier 1, 2, and 3, different levels of circles, right? Where tier 1 level of circle is making sure that when people come into the community, that we respect them, that we hear from them, that we get used to talking about our feelings, that we start developing a competency for self-awareness, for self-empowerment, for autonomy, that we share and we learn to share with one another, and how we create space and how we defer to someone when they are talking, and how we listen empathetically, right? That's tier 1. Tier 2 is often after or at an event where it's becoming critical, and there's players that we think might get up, that, you know, there might be harm or there is a small harm that has occurred, right? That's a tier 2 intervention. And tier 3 is after someone's been removed from the community, how do we bring them back? What is our process for bringing that person back into the community in a way that is meaningful for them? So teachers, this is coming to you if you haven't heard about it. And it gives me so much hope because you can't solve these problems on the back end. If we teach people and give people these tools on the front end, that's our best chance, right? So it's on you. I'm so excited for you. You get to do this stuff in your whole everyday lives soon. I don't want to, what time?
I'm sorry for taking the mic again. What you just said about the classroom interventions for behavior, are you talking about PBIS?
I'm not sure.
Positive behavioral intervention systems?
No, I don't think,
Okay.
I don't think
Thank you.
so. I don't want to say that for sure because I am not in the school district, but I don't believe that's the acronym for it. I love to answer more questions, but I also want to be respectful of your time. You have other workshops to attend, and I think we're at the end of our time together.
Thank you, Professor Laurent, for your thoughtful and timely presentation. Your gift of giving voice to the victim, the offender, and the community, and our need for healing is really powerful. I can't imagine a time in our history and in our community where that voice is more needed. And thank you for sharing these ancient ideas that are indigenous but are as timely as they have been throughout all of human history. And thank you for opening up a window where we can work to heal and restore our relationships and restore ourselves, actually. So thank you so much for that. I wanted to provide you, on behalf of Whitworth University, this gift. And let's give her another round of applause. Yeah, thank you. All right, so thank you so much for attending the first half of our event this evening. We hope that you've enjoyed the beginning of our conversation about adversity and equity, and the opportunities that truly come for healing, restoration, and true restoration of community through socio-emotional learning and the idea of restoration. I want to thank Dr. Scott McQuilkin for leading off our event. Secondly, I'd like to thank Father Roger Moses and the Native Generations Drumming Group. That's actually a healing song that they sang tonight for us, which I think is really appropriate given the theme of your talk. And I'd like to thank Professor Laurent again for the transformative message, and I pray that it goes out into our community through our individual relationships in our lives, and it begins a process of healing that takes off in our community. And then finally, I'd like to ask the members of the School of Education Diversity Committee Planning Team, I'd like to ask you to come up. I have a small gift for you. If you'd come up, please, the members of the committee. Right now, I would like for you to come up. I have a gift for you. So if you could give them a round of applause, I'd really appreciate it. So come through here, come around. Yeah, come this way. Okay. So Jennifer Van Buren has done a wonderful job coordinating all these events and getting everything ready as our event coordinator. Debbie Vogel is assistant director. Horatius is also the co-lead of the committee. Okay. Dr. Debbie Tolley. And Dr. David Cherry. So thank you so much. Yeah. So they've worked for 8 months, long before I got here, and there's 2 other committee members that weren't able to make it here tonight that I'd like to honor. And one of those is, of course, Dr. Wendy Bleeker, who was absolutely vital in bringing everything together tonight. And then I'd also like to publicly acknowledge and honor Dr. Roberta Wilburn. I'd like to give her a round of applause, even though she's not here tonight. All right, so now we're going to go ahead. I want to encourage you to go to the breakout sessions. We're going to take a 10-minute intermission, and we're going to transition to the breakout sessions. If you're interested in hearing more for Professor Laurent, please remain in the Robinson Teaching Theater to join her session titled Developing a Deeper Understanding of Restorative Justice. If you're interested in hearing from Pastor Sean Davis, he has an excellent presentation titled Healing in the Times of Adversity, Building Bridges, Not Walls. That will be located in Weyerhaeuser 111. We have volunteers that are standing outside that will help you locate the classrooms if outside the teaching theater. And thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the breakout sessions.